Lisbon was once the gateway to the globe, a city where the air carried the scent of cinnamon and pepper, and where the echoes of the Age of Discovery seemed to linger in every stone. In the early 18th century, Lisbon was not merely a European capital, it was one of the most important cities on Earth, a place where continents converged and the wealth of a worldwide empire flowed into its streets. Using advanced AI technology, we can now transform old sketches, copperplate engravings, and oil paintings into vivid photorealistic scenes, allowing us to do more than simply hear about history. Today, we can step into it. We can walk through the narrow alleys of Alfama, stand before the grandeur of the Ribeira Palace, and witness the catastrophe that forever altered European philosophy, architecture, and the future of Lisbon itself. In the early 1700s, Lisbon was home to nearly 200,000 people, making it the fourth largest city in Europe, surpassed only by London, Paris, and Naples. It was a city of striking contrasts. On one hand, it was celebrated as the new Rome, overflowing with churches, convents, and monuments that reflected Portugal's deep Catholic devotion. More than 40 churches and 90 convents dominated its skyline, their bells shaping the rhythm of daily life. On the other hand, Lisbon remained a chaotic medieval labyrinth, where immense imperial wealth passed through streets that still lacked even the most basic modern infrastructure, such as an effective sewage system. This golden age of prosperity, beauty, and religious fervor was moving steadily toward a terrifying climax, one that would erase the city in a single morning and force it to rise again as the first modern city of the Enlightenment. By 1750, Lisbon was the beating heart of a global machine. At the center of its power was the Tagus River, the golden throat of Europe and the lifeblood of the Portuguese Empire. In the mid-18th century, this was not simply a river, it was the wealthiest and most strategic harbor in the Atlantic world. Engravings from the period, such as the famous 1730 depiction by Joachim Otten, show a dense forest of shipmasts lining the waterfront, so thick that observers claimed one could almost cross the river by stepping from deck to deck. Ships arrived daily, feeding what historians now call the first truly global economy. Lisbon was the hub where Asia, Africa, and the Americas poured their treasures into Europe. The city's supremacy rested on 5 great pillars of trade and empire. The first was the spice link. Portugal held the keys to the east long before other European nations established firm trade routes. From Goa, Malacca, and Timor came pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and other aromatic riches of the Orient. These spices filled Lisbon's warehouses and were sold at enormous profit to a Europe hungry for luxury goods. Close behind was the second pillar, the silk and porcelain route. Through Macau, Portugal maintained a near monopoly on Chinese porcelain, the white gold coveted in every aristocratic household from Paris to London. The third pillar was the African connection. By controlling strategic ports in Angola and Mozambique, Lisbon dominated Atlantic trade winds and funneled ivory, rare woods, gold, and enslaved human beings into its economy. Yet the true engine of Lisbon's 18th century wealth was the fourth pillar, the Age of Gold. The Brazilian boom, after massive gold deposits were discovered in Minas Gerais in 1695. A literal river of wealth began crossing the Atlantic. Nearly 1,000 tons of gold and countless diamonds arrived at Lisbon's docks in the decades leading up to disaster. This influx transformed the city into the wealthiest creditor and primary warehouse of the world. This unimaginable fortune turned Lisbon into a cultural and scientific magnet. Kings did not merely hoard the gold, they invested it in prestige. João V commissioned grand aqueducts, lavish churches, and libraries filled with secret nautical charts, known as the Roteiros documents, as valuable as nuclear codes in the 18th century. Containing the hidden navigation knowledge of the world's oceans, Lisbon became a city where Dutch merchants, English traders, Italian financiers, and African sailors mingled with Portuguese stevedores along the noisy riverfront. The Ribeira district glittered with imperial wealth, yet it also reeked of harsh reality. Unlike inland capitals such as Paris or London, Lisbon faced the open sea directly, obsessed with the horizon. But beauty concealed decay. The Tagus River served not only as Lisbon's gateway to the world, but also as its primary sewer. Domestic waste was thrown from windows into the streets, eventually washing downhill into the river. Travelers spoke of the legendary stench of Lisbon, where luxury and filth coexisted side by side. The river provided fish that fed the starving poor, yet also carried diamonds that adorned royal crowns. At the heart of Lisbon's imperial identity stood the Paço da Ribeira, the Ribeira Palace. For over 250 years, it served as the royal residence of Portuguese kings and the administrative brain of an empire stretching from Brazil to Indonesia. If Versailles symbolized French power, the Ribeira Palace symbolized Portuguese global reach. Within its walls were more than 70,000 volumes in the royal library, priceless archives of the Age of Discovery, and paintings by masters such as Titian, Rubens, and Correggio. João V spent Brazilian gold with an intensity rivaling Louis XIV, transforming the Portuguese court into a spectacle of Baroque excess. Yet to understand Lisbon fully, one must also understand its relationship with God. The Jeronimos Monastery in Belém stood as the spiritual anchor of the city. Built with the pepper tax levied on goods from India, sailors prayed here before voyages lasting years, and survivors returned to give thanks. Nearby, the Belém Tower served as both ceremonial gateway and grim prison, its damp dungeons holding forgotten prisoners as tides rose. Religion permeated every corner of Lisbon. Churches and chapels stood almost everywhere, their bells marking hours of prayer and news alike. But devotion also carried a darker side. The Rocio Square, the center of public life, was also the stage for the auto da fe of the Portuguese Inquisition. Established in 1536, the Inquisition remained active in the 18th century, targeting new Christians suspected of secretly practicing Judaism, as well as those accused of heresy, witchcraft, or forbidden sexuality. Public executions became grim spectacles attended by nobility and even the king. While Enlightenment ideas spread through Parisian coffeehouses, Lisbon still burned people at the stake. Books were censored, and new philosophies were smuggled like contraband. Beyond the palaces of the riverfront lay the steep hills of Alfama, Lisbon's oldest district, a medieval maze that survived Moorish occupation and life here unfolded in the streets, as cramped houses forced people to cook, wash, and socialize outdoors. Fishwives called Varanus carried baskets of sardines atop their heads, shouting prices in rhythmic cries. Water was scarce, with no running supply in homes. Instead, immigrants from Galicia, known as carried heavy barrels uphill from public fountains. Forming the city's unseen muscle, across another hill lay Barro Alto. By day, it was quiet, home to aristocrats and craftsmen. By night, it became Lisbon's center of nightlife, where the earliest forms of fado emerged from sailors and the marginalized. Yet the darkness was dangerous. Crime was common, and chamber pots were emptied from windows with cries of agua va. Then came All Saints' Day, November 1st, 1755. Almost the entire population was inside churches, packed tightly for the holy holiday. Thousands of candles burned, incense filled the air, and Lisbon's devotion was at its height. At 9:40 in the morning, the earth began to shake. This was no minor tremor, but a massive undersea earthquake, later estimated between 8.5 and 9.0 in magnitude. The shaking lasted nearly 6 minutes, an eternity of terror. Stone roofs collapsed instantly in churches like the Carmo convent and the cathedral, crushing thousands of worshippers. Narrow streets became death traps as buildings leaned and toppled into one another. Survivors fled toward the Tagus River, the only open space away from falling debris. Thousands gathered on the quays, staring back at their ruined city. Then they noticed something strange. The water was receding. The earthquake had triggered a massive tsunami. About 40 minutes later, a wall of water 20 to 30 feet high raced up the Tagus, smashing into the riverfront and sweeping away survivors, docks, and the lower floors of the Ribeira Palace. Yet the nightmare was not finished. The fallen candles of All Saints' Day ignited the wooden ruins, and dozens of fires merged into a firestorm. With streets blocked and water systems destroyed, the flames raged unchecked for 5 days. Lisbon did not simply fall, it was crushed, drowned, and burned. The destruction was staggering. Out of 200,000 inhabitants, between 30,000 and 60,000 died. 85% of Lisbon's buildings were destroyed. The Ribeira Palace vanished. The Royal Library burned with its 70,000 volumes. Archives of the great voyages were lost forever. Paintings by Titian and Rubens turned to ash. The Carmo convent remains ruined today, a skeleton open to the sky, preserving the haunting vision survivors saw in 1755. The disaster shook more than the ground. It shook European thought itself. Philosophers such as Voltaire and Rousseau debated how a good God could allow such suffering on a holy day in a devout city. The Lisbon earthquake marked the end of blind religious optimism and helped ignite the age of Enlightenment. In the aftermath, King Jose I was paralyzed by fear, refusing ever again to live within stone walls. The task of rebuilding fell to one man, Sebastião José de Carvalho Melo, de Marquês de Pombal. When asked what should be done, legend says he replied simply, bury the dead and feed the living. Pombal saw destruction as opportunity. He cleared ruins, ignored old property lines, and designed a rational new city center, the Vaixa Pombalina. He implemented the world's first earthquake-resistant building techniques, requiring structures to be built with the flexible wooden pombaline cage. Soldiers even marched around models to simulate seismic waves. Streets were widened, alleys replaced with boulevards, and azulejo tiles mass-produced to speed reconstruction. The new Lisbon rose with Praça do Comércio at its heart, built on the exact site of the vanished Ribeira Palace. By naming it Commerce Square, Pombal declared Portugal's shift from religious empire to modern mercantile nation. Today, the square remains Lisbon's living room, where one walks atop the ruins of palace, tsunami, and fire. Lisbon's story is one of extreme highs and devastating lows. It rose as the queen of the seas, fell in a morning of fire and water, and was reborn as a city of enlightenment and resilience. Behind grand facades and tourist streets, the spirit of the 18th century still lingers in the Saudade, the longing for what was lost. And in the stones of Alfama and arches of Carmo, Lisbon is a city that has seen the end of the world and decided to keep going, reminding us that even after the greatest tragedies, beauty can be rebuilt, stronger and more enduring than before.